Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. With this video we go back to that series on the Nobel Prize winners, which is something that I was looking forward to doing because it's been quite a while since the last video that I did for that podcast. So let me tell you a story here. Back when I was in college, so we are talking a very long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, a friend of mine gave me as a birthday present a copy of Kazuo Ishiguro's The Unconsoled. This was a very bold move on his part. He had not read the book and he actually wrote a little note here. He said, "I tried to find something you would enjoy. This sounds very interesting. I hope it's worth the read." It was worth the read. So this is many, many years later that I am thinking about this. But for some reason, I read with the years, as they kept passing, other books by Ishiguro. I read The Remains of the Day, Never Let Me Go, and a few others. But for some reason, this one remained unread all of these years until the spring break of this year, a couple of weeks ago, when I finally decided to pick up this book from the shelf. It has been there staring at me for all these years, and finally told myself, okay, let's read a few pages, okay? Because I had read the first page many, many times. I do that a lot with the books that I have not read. This time I said, okay, let's read maybe the first chapter or something like that. And let me tell you, I started reading it and I just couldn't put it down. So it was really an engrossing read and a really, really good experience. So I want to thank my friend Steven all of these years later for giving me this book as a present, which I should have read a very long time ago. I actually feel a little bit guilty about this whole thing. So I think the first thing that we should say about The Unconsoled is that in the context of Ishiguro's work, this is really the eccentric one, okay? It is by far his least read novel. And one thing that I really like about this author is talking about this, right? This idea that this is a different one, this is an eccentric one. If you think about it, every time that Ishiguro publishes a book, he offers something different. That's something that I really appreciate about him, because it's different, but at the same time, it's his style all the time. It has his signature. So that's something that I really appreciate. But even when you consider that every novel that he has published has something different to offer, this one is really, really different from all the others, at least the ones that I have read. I'm only missing 3 of them. So, you know, I have quite an idea of what Ishiguro's work is like. So this is his 4th novel, okay? He published A Pale View of Hills, An Artist of the Floating World, The Remains of the Day, and then comes The Unconsoled. And it is his longest, okay? His most experimental also, and I would even say his most daring novel of all of the ones that he has published so far. So if you are new to Ishiguro's work, I would say maybe this is probably not the best place to start, unless of course you like to begin at the least obvious place, as I like to do many times. This time it didn't happen because my first experience of Ishiguro's work was The Remains of the Day, so not very original of me. I wish I had started with this one, but sometimes I like to do that. So that's a little note there for you. So Kazuo Ishiguro, as you may know, received the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 2017. I still remember the day when I found out, you know, that this had been the Nobel laureate for this year. And the citation says, "In novels of great emotional force," okay, great emotional force, "he has uncovered the abyss beneath our illusory sense of connection with the world." I like all of those words right there. It's a very, very carefully crafted citation. And I'm going to say this, The Unconsoled may be a weird one, okay, even when you consider it in the context of Ishiguro's body of work. But it really illustrates this citation just as much as his other great novels, like The Remains of the Day, like Never Let Me Go. By the way, I am going to come back to Ishiguro's work in the future because he's really one of my favorite authors. So I really want to talk about as many books by him as I possibly can. So this novel, The Unconsoled, is about many things, but I think it is primarily about alienation. I think this is the most prominent theme that you are going to find in this book. So it really illustrates the citation very well, as I was saying before. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, you know, trying to approach this book, is a little bit about the structure and about the premise, as I always like to do. You know, I like to tell you how many pages we're dealing with, how many parts, how many chapters. The Unconsoled is 500 and 35 pages in length. So what we have here is a long novel. And Ishiguro said in an interview, I'm going to link it to the description because it's really good. It's an interview with Charlie Rose when The Unconsoled was published. So they talk about this novel in particular. I really, really like that. He said that the long novel is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the way he spoke about the long novel, he says this is kind of like a genre in itself. There's as much difference between a short story and a novel, he says, as between a novel and a long novel, because we are talking about a different kind of animal here. So 535 pages long. We have 4 parts to this novel. I'm going to tell you about the contents of those. And 38 chapters, okay, of more or less medium length. And this is something that you see throughout. So the novel covers 3 days in the life of Ryder with a Y, okay? He is a famous pianist, and he has come to a small town, a rather small town, to give a really, really important performance. Now, the problem here is that he keeps getting sidetracked, okay? Some characters ask him for favors and he goes to help them, and then while he's there, other characters ask him for something else, and he just goes from one thing to another like that, and he hasn't even been provided with a schedule of what he is supposed to do while he is at this town, or even about this very important performance that he has to give. So you notice his situation is really, really precarious right there. And we see him, Ryder, going just from one uncomfortable situation to another, and it's just a way for us to meet a wide array of characters throughout this novel. So as he has those surreal experiences, we meet these interesting characters, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them too, because I thought one way to look at this novel is to maybe tell you about the characters, and as we do that, look at the plot, if we can speak of plot here. I mean, I'll let you decide that, because it's one of those novels where at times you're going to feel like almost anything can happen. I'll also tell you a little bit more about that when I share with you my impressions on the text. So one of the first important characters that we meet, this is when Ryder arrives at the hotel, which is, by the way, the first thing that we hear about in the novel. He meets Gustav, who is the porter of the hotel. And then almost immediately after that, he meets the hotel manager, whose name is Mr. Hoffman. Now, Gustav, Mr. Hoffman, they are very important. Ryder is going to interact with them throughout the novel. So these are some of the major characters that we meet. We also find out that there's a certain Mr. Brodsky, who is a troubled conductor, and he's also going to be part of the performance, this very important performance that the whole novel is building up to. And in the town, there's just great anxiety as to whether Brodsky is going to be able to pull off this performance or not, because he has a very troubled past and a very complicated situation. Gustav, the porter, has a daughter. Her name is Sophie. And here's something really interesting. At one point, Ryder meets her, right? And it becomes apparent that they had some sort of communication before. And as the novel continues, it feels like almost as if she were his wife, as if there were a husband and wife type of relationship between them. And you're like, what is this, right? How did that happen? Ryder is a foreigner here, so it's a very strange situation. She has a son also. It's a little boy. You know, we meet him also throughout the novel, and his name is Boris. So that is another interaction that Ryder has. I think we should also mention Mr. Hoffman's son. His name is Stefan. He is also a pianist, and he's also going to participate in the performance. And what he wants to do is he wants to prove his worth as a musician to his parents. We also have Miss Collins, who was somehow connected, once involved with Mr. Brodsky, okay, very, very closely involved with him. And Brodsky himself, we should say that, since we're talking about this, he is also trying to prove his worth to Miss Collins and also to the entire town, because this town perceives Mr. Brodsky as a hopeless drunkard. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, look, I am a good conductor, I am a great conductor, and I'm going to try to prove that to everybody. So you have, as you can see, all of these personal anxieties, and they're just building the tension towards that climactic performance that we are waiting for, that is basically at the center of the novel. So going back to the parts, right, you're going to see that each one of the parts corresponds to one of the days. We have part 1 is the first day, part 2 the second one, part 3 the third day. But then part number 4 is just the night of the performance. So that's why I was telling you, this really covers 3 days in the life of this town and in the life of Ryder while he is there. So here's what I wanted to do when trying to, analyze this a little bit. I wanted to identify 3 important features of this novel for you. I think that's probably the best way to approach it. And the first one that I wanted to highlight is the absurdist quality that you're going to find in The Unconsoled. The first connection that I made almost immediately was with The Castle by Franz Kafka. Okay, and by the way, The Castle, I did a video on that novel in case you're interested. It just happens to be my most popular video of the ones that I have done in English at this point. So please feel free to check it out. I'm going to include the link in the description. So the protagonist, Ryder, he sees his efforts constantly frustrated. Okay, that is what happens in this text. He is pulled in one direction and then in another. He quite often doesn't really understand what is going on even, but he just makes the best of it. He tries his best and he just goes with the flow. So that's why I made the connection right there with Kafka. But here's another connection that I found that I thought was really interesting. I also thought of Beckett, and in particular I'm talking about the early Beckett. For example, the Beckett of What? The Beckett of Mercier and Camier, which is a novel that also made me laugh quite a lot. So I think if you're a fan of Kafka, if you're a fan of Beckett, you're going to be surprised that Ishiguro wrote in that vein. And I think you have a very, very good chance of enjoying a novel like The Unconsoled. The Unconsoled, and this is the second feature, is also an enigmatic, disorienting novel. Okay, it seems to take place in an alternate reality almost. And I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean by that, because it really goes against many of the traditional reader's expectations, and it just keeps giving us little surprises that we have to accept. Okay, some examples of what I mean by this. There's one point at which it becomes very, very clear that Ryder can almost read the mind of one of the other characters. He knows what that other character is worried about very specifically. So you're like, how, right? How is this possible? How can Ryder know what's going on in the mind of this other character? So that's something that goes against the traditional approach to the realist novel. He will also give us in detail conversations that other characters had with each other when he wasn't even present. So that's another, another moment where you're like, how could he possibly know that? He was not there. And that's what reminded me of Beckett's novel Mercier and Camier. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I believe, if I remember correctly, I don't have the book on me, but at one point the narrator says something to the effect that he is the right person to tell us the story of Mercier and Camier because he was with them throughout the journey. And by reading the novel that there was nobody with them. So you know what I'm saying? It's just a very, very strange situation. Here's another example. At one point, Ryder goes to the cinema. There's like a midnight or a night showing, and the movie is 2001: A Space Odyssey. But here's the thing. In this novel, Clint Eastwood is in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So you know what I'm saying? It's like, once again, you're like, Clint Eastwood is not in that movie. What are you talking about? So once again, this seems to happen in a kind of an alternate reality. It's a world. This is something that Ishiguro said in the interview. It's a world that responds to its own rules in a way. So it's an experimental novel in that sense. And here's something else. One final example of that I wanted to give you because I thought this scene was very well narrated. There's a point at which Ryder is going with Sophie and Boris to a gallery. And before he enters this place, he realizes that right there next to him, there's the wreck of a car that his family owned when he was a child. So how did this end up there? We're talking about, he's not even in his home country. He's in a foreign place, and he sees the wreck of this car that he used to ride in when he was a child. So very, very interesting, this approach right there, right, with this alternate reality kind of thing, the enigmatic, disorienting quality of this novel. And then the final thing that I wanted to emphasize is the surrealist type of humor that we find in The Unconsoled. I'm going to tell you this is a novel that made me laugh out loud. Okay, my mother was like, Jorge, is that book really that funny? I was like, no, Mom, I'm probably like the first person who ever laughed while reading this book, or not. I really want to hear about that. If you have read this novel and you thought it was funny, please let me know. Maybe I just have a weird sense of humor, but there are surrealist moments here, and I thought this was a hilarious novel at many times. I remember one part, where you have two ladies and they are talking to somebody that they know, and she is with Ryder right there. And the two ladies are just talking about having met Ryder, and they're just going into this whole thing and talking about how wonderful it was and all that. And they just seem completely oblivious to the fact that Ryder is right there with them. So you ask yourself, what is it? Did they meet somebody else? Or what's going on here? I was reminded of a movie by Luis Buñuel, The Phantom of Liberty, right? I think that's probably my favorite movie by Buñuel. And there is a part in which they are looking for a little girl who is supposedly missing. So her parents are there talking to the school authorities, and everybody's so worried. And the child is right there with them all the time. So you see what I'm saying with the surrealist type of humor and that kind of connection. And also another thing that made me laugh was just a very, very long dialogue that we find. Sometimes they're almost monologues because they keep going for pages. Here's one scene that I thought was particularly funny. There's one point in which Ryder asks for a place to rehearse because he realizes that the night of the performance is coming, and he hasn't even had time to rehearse because of all the adventures, quote unquote, that he has had in this place. So he asks for a place to practice the piano. He is taken to a place that turns out to be unsatisfactory. So he says, I'm going to need some other place, a place where I can have more privacy. So Hoffman says, okay, so I should probably take you to the annex. Okay, so they go to the annex. They get in the car and they start driving, and the driving keeps going and going. And you're like, where is this annex thing? They have to drive to it. And Hoffman is just going into this whole story, and I kept passing the pages, turning the pages, and the dialogue keeps going. There was like a block of dialogue in each one of these pages for like 5 of those pages. And I was like, I just thought that was hilarious. He's taking him to this other place. It's God knows where. And he just keeps going and going when the other guy's like really, really worried. So, things like that just really made me laugh out loud, really. So now I want to share my impressions with you on this thing. And I think one thing we can do is just put everything here into the mix, the absurdism, the enigmatic, disorienting quality of the novel, the surrealist humor, and also let me add something else. There's quite an element of the grotesque here in the Unconsoled, okay? So we put all of that into the mix. What do we make of this novel? I personally think that what the Unconsoled is doing is to present us with the protagonist's nightmare. This is a nightmare that Ryder is having, maybe even his own personal version of hell. And in that interview that I have been mentioning, Ishiguro says that while he is not a religious person, maybe this is his own version of Judgment Day, that final time when you have to give an account of your life and what you have done with the time that you were allotted here on Earth. So that's another way maybe of looking at it. I think The Unconsoled is really a projection of Ryder's anxieties and insecurities. The general mood that you find here is one of inadequacy. So that is one of the many reasons why I made the connection with Kafka. But here's something interesting regarding that. Just like in Kafka, you find some kind of an irrational logic to the things that are being narrated. Kafka is not just irrational. He is logical too. He is subjective and objective, as many people have said. So I would describe it as an irrational kind of logic that you find in this novel. And that's what makes it, interesting and just gripping, as a story and as an atmosphere, as a kind of nightmarish type of place that you enter when you read this book. Now, before we conclude, I wanted to talk briefly at least about something that I thought was really interesting, and that is the title. Okay, so the title is just wonderfully ambiguous. Apparently this word, unconsoled, doesn't even exist, so it's a made-up term. While I was writing my notes about it, the spell check of Microsoft Word kept underlining this word in red. Now, if you look at the title in Spanish, it's a very different matter because the ambiguity, or much of it at least, is lost because in Spanish, adjectives are gendered and numbered, right? So you have to choose, you have to pick a gender and the number there. In English, you just have the unconsoled, right? Just as maybe in Beckett, you have the unnameable, which is even more ambiguous, because the unnameable could even be a concept. We may not even be talking about a person, right? So it's really, really open when you do something like that. So in English, you just have the unconsoled. Are we talking about one person? If we're talking about one person, which one is it? Is it Ryder? Is it Sophie? Is it Hoffman? Is it Brodsky? Which one of them? Or the other option, maybe we are talking about many people, right? We are talking maybe about all of the characters. All of them may be the unconsoled. This is a place where there is no consolation, just as in hell, for example, right? So all of that is packed into the title, you know, so which one is it? One person, many people? And of course, the answer is all of the above, and that's what makes it wonderfully ambiguous, as I said before, and I really like the choice of the title. The word, by the way, the unconsoled, doesn't even appear in the entire novel. So you see what I'm saying? We're dealing here with a really, really interesting text. So the bottom line, the Unconsoled may not be the best part to begin if you want to experience the work of Kazuo Ishiguro, but it is a fascinating novel, and I really wish that more people would give it a chance. I think maybe part of what Ishiguro was doing here, and this adds another dimension to the reading experience, is maybe trying to meditate on fame after he had won the Booker Prize for The Remains of the Day, which, if you remember, came right before this one. So maybe he was channeling his experience there in this book that is about a famous pianist and all this idea of, how the people treat him because of that fame. The novel conveys it has an air of banality, right? There's an air of paralysis to it. Obsession, that's another thing that you can find here. But because of that, because of all those elements and what we were mentioning before about the enigmatic quality and all that, it really maintains the tension throughout. This novel, I think, is a testament to Ishiguro's powers as a narrator, maintaining that tension. He is just amazing. That's what makes him one of my favorite authors. So this is in fact quite different from anything else that Ishiguro ever wrote. And if you think about it, he never really went back to this vein. He tried other things after this, but that is precisely why I love it, because it's the odd one out. It's the eccentric novel, it's the weird one. And having experienced other works by Ishiguro, I really, really enjoyed having the experience of this one now. So maybe after all, it is a good thing that I waited so many years to read it after having read his more well-known works. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. Those were my 2 cents on The Unconsoled by Kazuo Ishiguro. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.